Adrian, you're gonna go first. That's okay. Okay, very good. Adrian Lyme is a poet, spray paint artist, and a UAW auto worker, a co-creator of Toledo, Ohio's Almeida Street Poets. He helped to launch the Toledo, Poetry Museum and ToledoPoet.com. Adrian coordinated and was a member of the ensemble cast of Back to Jack Kerouac, Readers Theater for 10 years. His books are Feeding the Monster, 2018 EMP Books, a collaboration of factory poems with poet Michael Grover, and Every Broken Little Thing, 2021 Lucador. Lucador, okay, Lucador Press. Adrian works as a chemist at the Toledo Jeep North Assembly Plant and lives in a nice little house in West Toledo with his wife, who I believe is here. There she is. Okay, go ahead, Adrian, please.
All right, thank you. It's great to be here. It's been a while since I did a feature reading, so I'm kind of going through a lot of my old favorites, but then I do have a new poem within the last year, which is pretty remarkable for me. Anyway, I'm going to start out with a poem about poems. It's called Sometimes the Poem. Sometimes the poem is your older brother, an exasperating love you can't imagine losing. Sometimes the poem is your older brother, always there for you when you need him most, but then he beats your ass for no good reason. Sometimes the poem is your lover, you've waited a seeming lifetime to hold, and now that she's here, you can't get enough. Sometimes the poem is your lover, and nothing else in the world exists at that very moment. Sometimes the poem is your dog, impatiently waiting for you to just throw the stick already. Sometimes the poem is your old drinking buddy. Maybe too often the poem is your old drinking buddy. Both have seen you at your worst, but still hang around. And sometimes the poem is a swallowed fish hook, a silver treble, triple barb to stay put, to sink in deep, to hold tight no matter how hard you fight at the line. And all you're left to ask yourself just then is, what are you willing to go through to get it out? Thanks. So I wrote a poem for somebody I met decades ago named Carlos Gaetti. So this is Winter in Havana for Carlos Gaetti. I took a taxi from the hospital in Havana. I'd been a stranger too long, and so I ran crazed through a street fair, cackling like a mynah bird, and then fell to my knees silent as a tractor with no spark plug. They put me in an asylum for 2 days. I told them I'm American. They threatened never to let me out. I crept back to the room I rented from Mrs. Gaetti. The money in my jeans was taken, so I ran some down to the taxi driver who seemed happy to wait. He was happy to be paid. Mrs. Gaetti was happy I was back. It's December and the kitchen smells like cinnamon. I want to eat a tomato and a nectarine. I settle for a cup of chili beans, a piece of dry flatbread, a glass of beer. I yawn, and my eye catches sight of the Mother Mary, a copper statuette. Even cast of metal, her face is soft. I would like a handful of raisins, but we have no raisins. I walk into the street. December is the best time of year, no rain and not too hot. A breeze pulls sweat across my face, the scent of a dead cat somewhere. When I close my eyes, I could be back in New York City. I could be in any big city, the whir and the mumble of people, the whir and the crash of a city. In the day, I can close my eyes, but at night changes everything. There's music and alcohol, and Carlos and I wind through the streets throwing stones at stray cats and more stray cats, and Mrs. Gaetti worries about the police. There's always the fear of the police. What's that? All right, I wrote a lot of love poems. I'm only going to read a couple here, and one of them's new. So this is just by way of preface. My wife worked for many years in a corporate headquarters tower downtown, and I worked in an auto factory, so just very different worlds. So this is a poem called One Lucky Bastard. I've wound my way through endless halls with wood paneled walls, so much frosted glass and brass trim. I've been helped through security checkpoints to floor 16 where cards are swiped and thick glass doors buzzed open. I've traversed vast expanses of fabric-covered fields of cubicle, a lattice work of uniformity like fractal corals spread beneath perfect humming fluorescence. I am lost and desperate in a foreign land, my wife's office building. I'm just to drop off a letter, something important she meant to bring with her. Can you drop it off quick on your way to work? Sure, I'll meet you up there. My factory life makes sense to me, but this sterile place is horrifying. It's too quiet. Everyone smiles, pleading smiles, and all the air smells like toner and carpet shampoo. Just then, passing the far end of the aisle I'm currently trapped in, she crosses my line of sight. On some task, I'm sure, but she doesn't know I'm there. She is in her element, and I am doe-eyed, fumbling, and hopeless. She's the most beautiful person I've ever laid eyes on, and I am one lucky bastard. It reminds me of years back when we were students together, crossing paths in university halls, hoping to match up our schedules, keeping my eye out for her, wishing to bump into her at unexpected moments, making time to meet at coffee shops, wholly unaware of what the future held for us. I didn't have the eyes back then to see the woman I see today. I hear her voice rise from some submerged place, some workspace hidden in a matrix of sameness, say, he's here right now, and her head pops up. She is standing tippy-toe, a quick sweep, and she finds me. I hold up the envelope and wave, and she smiles. She smiles at me like I'm some kind of hero. Here's a new one, and it had a title, but then the line that the title came from was cut, so I don't know what the title is right now, but soon it'll have a title. It's a new one, and it goes like this. It's been unusually quiet in our house for 2 full days, and because I can't remember if we are still in argument, I go to apologize to my wife. I don't know what for. I recall something about shoelaces or perhaps boots. All I know is that we, both writers, feed on each other's words. Now there are none, and I am starving. But because I can't remember who thinks they won, which word one of us felt slighted by, or which offending look, I'm afraid my not knowing will seem worse than the silence. I walk into her office room. She is tapping away on her computer. She sees me standing silent and says, "Are we still arguing? I can't remember why, but I don't like this." And 20-some years of our life together flashes back to me, all the trials and tragedies and ecstasies, the longings and small victories. What can I do then but laugh? It was, of course, never about shoelaces or boots. I say I can't remember either. And though I feel foolish, we talk and talk and talk and fill each other back up. Okay. Allen Ginsberg, the poet, was really important to me as I was in college and understanding poetry in bigger than I had understood it before. And then the whole world opened up to me. But Allen Ginsberg was one of the first ones. So here's a poem I wrote called On Allen Ginsberg's Death. The first shock of what a poem can do is a precious gift and no need to know to whom you've given it. I saw you read for an hour in Michigan, and you swore your only wish in your old age is that your asshole holds out. Your poems were soft and loud, sounded nothing like the slow swell of a siren on an East Village street driving to collect your silent mouth, still body. But if we would have been together that day, I would have offered to hold you, carry you in my arms like a child. And when the great dark figure walked with us, touching your heart, squeezing your breath, you alone would have seen him there. And when newspaper clippings wrapped their black on you, telephones ringing all over the country, have you heard? And I staggered for a moment. Some part of you reached out from your books, from that sullen place, reached out to me, offered to carry me in your arms like a child. All right, so here's a poem I wrote, and it's just adjacent to Allen Ginsberg. He wrote a poem called Improvisation in Beijing, where he lists reasons why he writes poetry, and it was very gorgeous. And I wrote my own list called Why I Write Poetry. I write poetry because I spent 8 years learning how to be a scientist, and I couldn't stand it anymore. I write poetry because when I see a blank sheet of paper, I want to fill it. I write poetry because sometimes I read so much my head gets full. I write poetry because you can find 10,000 poems about the moon, but I wanted 10,001. I write poetry because everything hasn't been said quite yet. I write poetry because when I talk to myself, people think I'm crazy, but if I write it down, they think I'm talented. I write poetry because when words fall out of my hands, they need a place to rest. I write poetry because these haggard factory hands can do more than just build jeeps. I write poetry because America puts brown children in cages. I write poetry because America has always put brown children in cages, and we keep saying this is not who we are. I write poetry because a society that cannot produce poets is a dead society. I write poetry because I want to resurrect my father. I write poetry because my father has no grave, and so my poems are his constant tombs. I write poetry because Mr. Whitmore told me he liked the poem I showed him in high school. I write poetry because I bullshit myself through most days, but I believe myself when I'm writing. I write poetry because I use an antique typewriter that stops me from revising as I type. I write poetry because my photo albums are all full, but I still have some notebooks. I write poetry because sometimes a tree is just a tree, but of course not. It is always more. I write poetry because anyone could write a poem, but not just anyone will be a poet. I write poetry because some of the very best people I know are poets. I write poetry because some of the very worst people I know are poets. I write poetry because John Swale told me to. I write poetry because free speech is a miracle that can be killed by the same people who decree that corporations are people and money is speech. I write poetry because poetry kills fascists. I write poetry because poems are beacons and this world can be dark. I write poetry because Jeremy Kaiser beat me up in the 8th grade and said poetry is gay. And now Jeremy Kaiser is in a poem. I write poetry because I don't like to talk very much, but I have a lot to say. I write poetry because poetry is big medicine for a disjointed mind. I write poetry because this country is belching fire upon a tinderbox world, and Tom Barden tells me you do not have the right to remain silent. I write poetry because I'm too shy to sing. I write poetry because I can't give birth. And I write poetry because you can only put so many words on your tombstone, and you got to make them count. So I work at the Jeep plant. I worked on the line for 8.5 years. I'm a chemist now. Some of those jobs are terrible, and so this is just from that world. I'll start out with the best poets I know are workers. I admit my bias toward working people. I pull more wisdom from a bead of sweat creasing down a dusty brow than I do from the wild hair of the ascetic tweed jacket, elbow patches, and blear eyes. Something there is nourishing about pushing hands into soil, fingers like roots seeking connection and synthesis. And what is a poet if not a farmer of truth? Like a seed, a truth will grow where it is dropped onto paper, will take root. There's an alchemy to poetry that farmers know, that factory workers live, that those in Tyvek suits shimmying flashlight and mouth through dank crawl spaces understand. There's an alchemy to poetry that workers know, even if they don't know they know it. I admit my bias toward working people, the raw but rich over the academic, my jealousy toward Neruda's odes to common things. I write my odes to socks and my work boots each day. I admit my bias toward working people. I see how they make barren soil fertile, how they cultivate and create. And I too want my fingers to root. I want to drop my ink seeds and tell the beautiful truth. And it's a bit of a longer poem called Two Birds. It comes from working in that sort of environment as well. Two birds. The assembly line is a monster that is always hungry, and you feed it all day long for 30 plus years if you're lucky. Cycles of 40 seconds, 12 hours per day for most of your adult life. It's important to point at something specific in the blur that is the last week or month, and to give it a name and to make it mean something. So complaining becomes a pastime. Everyone here has the toughest job in the factory. The assembly line is a monster that is always hungry, and as the years pass, you complain and complain, and your back begins to hunch, and your legs begin to bow, and your hands slowly distort to better fit your tools. You sometimes quietly pray for a breakdown somewhere to stop the line, even just for a minute. And when it finally happens, you look at each other and you say, free money, I'll take it. And you say, any downtime is good time. And then you drink your water and rub fists into your back. The assembly line is a monster that is always hungry until it isn't, until the economy dips and the company decides to ship some jobs overseas, but not too many, and they'll only close one plant each in Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, but it's your plant that closes. And so now you're trying to decide whether any downtime is actually good time, and your buddy who works at the stamping plant down the street says you should have expected this and planned better. God knows he has. Now you and 6,000 other workers spend your days making what money you can, and your nights are restless with hard hands rubbing the back of your sweaty neck. And what sleep you get are just dreams of getting back into that factory you hope to get out of. The days still blur by, but now each day is a new worry, a new grind to see if there's work available anywhere. What can you get? For how long? What's the pay? And is it even worth it? You'll take any job, even if it isn't. There's no more monster to feed. Until one day there is, and isn't it great they're opening the factory back up? But by now you're so beat down, you don't really believe it anyway, until the power plant starts buzzing back and the smokestacks start belching gray steam. The wastewater slow starts to froth, and you get that call from your steward. Are you still around? You are. You go through the gate and head toward your station, and you find that you've only been back for 30 seconds, but you already feel like you wish it were quitting time. And everyone walking that corridor with you is bow-legged, with igloo coolers and gallons of water from Kroger. The whole building is humming, but it matches the humming of your bones, and you suddenly realize that you're not just hungry, but hungry for the heat and the grease and the noise and the calluses that will split and that you will filthily suck at those line breaks you silently pray for. You walk past a wall of welder transformers, which makes you think back to the day two little birds flew into the body shop and couldn't figure out how to get out. How one of them just hid away up in the trusses and even stayed around for months afterward, occasionally pecking food from dumpsters and sometimes even shitting on the boss's desk, which made it an honorary union member as far as you're concerned. But the other bird panicked, madly darted back and forth while the workers all chuckled and pointed, because if that idiot bird would just fly out of the dock bay door, he'd be free. And we smiled and we called him Bird Brain until he slammed into that heavy steel cage wall by those transformers and momentarily stunned himself. And suddenly it's not so funny, as we all realize together that little fellow is going to kill himself. So now there's a phalanx of union workers with long-handled push brooms held high, beer bellies blobbing from beneath t-shirts, trying to guide the tiny bird out of that dock door like fat, awkward cattlemen wrangling a frantic calf. And there's a good moment there when we all think it's working until it flies high, fast, suddenly plonking beak first into a second-story window and then tumbles down to the floor so softly that when it strikes the cement, it doesn't even make a sound. The push brooms lower, and we all look for a few moments until someone sweeps the body out of the door and off the dock. The sudden memory of those two little birds is still buzzing in your mind as you finally get back to your station that seems to have been patiently waiting for you all those months. And it strikes you then that you've worked with people like that, who had those panicked eyes and shaky hands, steamed up safety glasses, who miss their rivets just because they're afraid they're going to. And no matter what you say to them, they cannot shake that feeling until one day they just walk out of the factory and never come back. But then it hits you just as hard that makes you the other bird, the one that's still trapped but doesn't seem to mind. And you wonder, as you line up your tools and check your stock, which bird you would rather be. But your air pressure is good and the bell sounds, so you just depress the safety button, fire 7 steel rivets into the fender bar, smoothly dead center, 3 in the middle, 2 on each side, 3 in the middle, 2 on each side, 3 in the middle, 2 on each side. All right, that's that one. I've got 2 more. Let's see. 2 more poems. This one is called After Reading Ted Kooser All Night at Work. I hold in my 2 large hands a tin box full of colored pencils, good ones given as a present, and a sketch pad of stout textured white paper. And I realize that in the proper hands, this is all that is necessary to produce a masterpiece. My hands are clumsy mitts, I know, thick and a little shaky. Who would blame Picasso for being talented? Francis Bacon, Van Gogh, Matisse? It never crosses my mind to expect that of myself. Yet I scritch and scratch my pencils, I sip my tea and happily sigh. And so it is, after reading Ted Kooser all night at work, I sit on break with my notebook and pen, or at home before my little Remington 5 and a fresh sheet of typing paper in the early morning after shift hush to write. Did you know that the words Ted Kooser uses are the very same words I use? The same paper, the same pen, the same tin box of words. So I smile and sigh, listen to the words in my head, let my mind wander, and then I turn myself around, sip my tea, and go happily back to my typing. All right, and I'll end with this one. This is the last book of Every Broken Little Thing, the last poem in the book. And I'll leave you with this. It's called Unsolicited Advice for Insecure People. Make love with her now like it is the last time. It is always the last time. Pray that the sky marries the horizon. Pray that the sea marries the sky. Pray that the dust learns to weep. Pray that those tears are nourishing. See spring buds as red leaves. They are. Imagine your Nana as a little girl. Think of all those pigtails she yanked. Of course she did. Leaves fall each year and cover the sidewalk. Jump when the song says jump. Pray the sun comes back each morning. It will come up anyway, sure, but it's good to keep magic. Don't walk near cliff's edges, but walk near cliff's edges. So much depends upon remembering that there is nothing after this, and then making the most of what comes next. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Adrian, for your splendid and tender poems. So the chat is open. Now is the time to put your comments about Adrian's work there. I neglected to just ask people, if you're moving around, to please turn off your camera. It can be distracting. It's one of the reasons why we keep the chat shut down during the reading so that people aren't distracted away from the poet reading. So now's the time to let Adrian know what you thought and how you felt about his work. And again, I would just say that if you're moving around or eating or, you know, whatever, just turn off the camera till you're done with that. We'd most appreciate that. Okay, so our next featured poet, Claudia Stanek. Claudia and I met in 2005 in Vermont, and I'm happy to say that she has distinguished herself as a marvelous poet and also a helper to many poets. So I'm really glad to feature her yet again. So Claudia M. Stanek's life in East Tennessee is managed by her rescued dogs. She holds an MFA from the writing seminars at Bennington College. Her chapbook, Language You Refuse to Learn, which is a marvelous book, by the way, was a co-winner of the Bright Hill Press's 2013 annual contest. Claudia's poems have been published in Stasis, Solem, Book of Matches, Atticus Review, and Rust Plus Moth, among others, and are forthcoming in Cut Leaf and The Phoenix. Her work has also been anthologized in Like Light, 25 Years of Poetry and Prose by Bright Hill Poets and Writers. Her poem Housewife was selected by Judith Lang Zamon as the inspiration for a commissioned libretto for the Eastman School of Music's Women in Music Festival. Claudia received a stipend from the Arts and Cultural Council of Greater Rochester, as well as a writer's residency in Poland. She is a founding member of a poetry nonprofit, Just Poets, Rochester, New York. And with that, I give you my friend, Claudia M. Stanek. Claudia?
Thank you. And thank you to Susanna and to Judy for inviting me to read. I was very privileged to read in person in 2019, and my dear friend, Donna Marbach, who is now deceased, and I went down to Palm Beach, and it was a great time. In thinking of Donna, who passed away during COVID, I wrote a poem while she was struggling with end-of-life issues, which was published this spring in The Phoenix. And it's the poem I'd like to start off with. It's called Rest. You do not have to continue. Your voice tells your body, considering yourself as if from afar. You trace the outline of your body like the memory of a crime. You want to leave yourself in a heavy coat. Get outside where the air is not so antiseptic, to fill your startled lungs. It is way past late. A little while longer, and you will lie in your grave. Dirt will cover you, your body, not your life. The bulk of what I'm going to read this afternoon for you is from my as yet unpublished manuscript called Beneath Occluded Shine. It is a series of 16 poems that are shorter for the most part, and they are all in response to various questions posed by Pablo Neruda in his book of questions. I'll read each epigraph before the poem. The first poem I'd like to read for you is called Transparent Language. The epigraph reads, is it true they scatter transparent letters across the sky? When you raise your eyes to the punctuated sky, you see letters of all scripts, scattered in mock collage. When you shield your eyes from the glory of the sun, you see the random spatter of the words that matter most on your palm. When your eyes no longer see anything but a mist of light, the magnifier that should illumine sentences will brand your hand. When you wish you had never known sight, you will listen for the transparent clauses but hear the lonely braille of I. As some of you know who know me, I'm kind of into family history, and this poem has something to do with that. The title is Sunday Morning in Broken November. The epigraph reads, "How long do others speak if we have already spoken? Sabbath morning rakes my skin as I tour St. Mary's to learn how the names of dead Poles speak. Headstones shiver as I photograph rows of silent quote unquote skis and quote unquote witches. Eroded dates yield no parentheses of time. Squirrels' nails catch on tree bark as they spiral upward in chase. Crows idle on branches high above, signals the dead would understand if they had ears to listen." This next poem is forthcoming from the Poetry Society of Tennessee's annual anthology. The title is Hands Full of Heaven, and the epigraph reads, "How many churches are there in heaven?" And I'm sure some of you can relate to this. As I describe it, I'm sure you will be able to picture it in your minds. In a child's finger play, hands backside up with fingers interlaced, knuckles entwined, except for the steeple where first fingers touch and point upward, assuming that up is superior to down. People wait behind closed doors. If no one opens them, how will we know if any communicants are kneeling on padded benches, awaiting God's presence in bread and wine? What if there are congregations that do not kneel in worship, or don't know heaven came down? Others that seek to restore Babel's tower? Will their stained windows keep out clouds of doctrine and showers of theology? Salt of the earth. The epigraph reads, "Why do clouds cry so much, growing happier and happier?" With each proffered drop of rain, sky shouts to cathedrals of salt, "Arise from stained faces and bless all the earthen tombs." How is it that saline never extends its portion of tears as an offering? Cycle of tears. The epigraph reads, "How do we thank the clouds for their fleeting abundance? Eons of our bottled tears, kept for just this use, accumulate in the air until shakers of tiny salt grains dry inside. We empty our shakers onto the soil with the sweat of futility, pray for the anointing of our land. Clouds cry in their travail, overcome rivers of labor and flood the land. Old and new bottles overflow with the joy of clear sky, while generations drown in hunger. Our bodies once afloat together with the tides, now whitened bones strewn across a dusty new sea. Oops. Of course, trying to turn a page and it's not working. The title poem from this particular manuscript, Beneath the Clouded Shine, has comes from this question of Neruda's. Where did the full moon leave its sack of flour tonight? In the gently tugged tide lies the leaven. For you, it is the gluten of breakdown, not expansion, mixed into the matter. See bubbles erupt along the surface. Tonight renders excess, a final call for all revenants. Afterlife landscape. Neruda asks, why does the professor teach the geography of death? My response was, when the heart muscle renders life flat and the body leaves its linear reality, what topography will be encountered before the pyre of ablated horizons? The next poem is Envy, something I think we can all relate to in one form or another. Neruda asks, what does old ash say when it passes near fire? Oh, to manifest that radiant flare, to combust again as poems become kindling. There must always be remnants of verse, pulp burned to warm bodies, ash to be captured on the wind. The physics of flight. Neruda asks, why don't the immense airplanes fly around with their children? Lift and thrust do not apply to the invisible. Heft matters more to children dragged in the thin chaos of escape. I really liked Adrian's poem incorporating the birds. Since moving to Tennessee, I guess it's a big thing down here that hummingbirds are notorious for getting caught in garages. And just twice last year, I've had to deal with hummingbirds in my garage. And fortunately, I've been able to rescue them both. But as other people have told me, that is kind of rare. They generally cannot figure out how to get out of the garage, and generally people cannot help them. So this next poem is called Flight. The epigraph reads, from what does the hummingbird hang its dazzling symmetry? Consider the hummingbird stuck in the shed when lightning whips, how thunder speeds the flight to nowhere. Family history. The epigraph is, why do trees conceal the splendor of their roots? One oak climbed skyward more than 100 years before burial with its roots. A hollowed willow suffered heart rot until it could no longer thirst nor bend. A maple's bark curls and peels, trunk exposed, time will erode the depths of each root's tendrils. White anchors, unprotected, mirror vacant branches above. My great uncle, who lived to be over 100 years old, was a master rose gardener. They were actually, he never had children, and they were actually his children. This next poem is a double cinquain, and the title is Rose. Neruda's question is, when is the appointment of the rose decreed under the earth? Petals over the linked chain, their rusted jailer, sail down, cover clover. Color pelts, rain sieges. The gardener shakes each prismed drop. On the other side, no guardian waits for sun. Smoke and cloud. The epigraph reads, does smoke talk with the clouds? From fireplaces and foundries, forests bereft of foliage, crack houses abandoned but full, trains aflame off their tracks, roofs stabbed by lightning. Smoke's ashy arms stretch beyond pillows of vapor, then shrug back into the soft embrace of cloud. Smoke speaks nothing of this sacrifice for the sake of ethereal communion, its submission to the force that would douse its origins, but which chooses instead escape. Denizens. The epigraph reads, what is it that upsets the volcanoes that spit fire, cold, and rage? You are the temperature too hot not to be cold, tumbling to the core, circulating the flow of a fury churned to dizziness. You swallow a mountain, regurgitate the liquid of our helplessness. We acquire the cold scheme of your new surface, your newly formed inhabitants. Meditation on prayer. The epigraph is it true our desires must be watered with dew? The blessing of night lies upon the greenery of the ground. We beg for this. Pray that our wants become those of divinity. As each drop of dew passes into atmosphere, want becomes need, a less than divine addiction, with neither hope of withdrawal nor substitute. And the last poem I have for you was also published this spring. It's called Trust and Obey. It is not from the chapbook. It does have an epigraph, which comes from a hymn, which was written by John H. Sammis back in 1887. The epigraph for this poem is, trust and obey, for there's no other way to be happy in Jesus, but to trust and obey. Obedience is the knowledge of proper action or inaction, beyond carved stone commands. Why the dog sits and stays for a bowl of kibble, why the kid cleans her plate for ice cream. How does a dog trust the person who leaves him out in the summer sun, shadeless and waterless, without a thought? How does a child trust one parent who holds a knife to the other? God is not a cruel human. God is not a vicious parent. God chose to go waterless into the sun-filled desert. God let himself be killed. God is the body that wouldn't stay dead. God is the mind that wouldn't give in. God is the love that wants me to trust no one else. I do not yet know death's name. I know the name of the God who waits for me at the threshold. Because I am his, he trusts I will be there. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you, Claudia. Thank you for your remarkable, brilliant work.